David here with Figboot on Pens. I like to tell stories, and I like to review things that have interesting stories behind them. So what I have today is a product that has an interesting story behind it, and even has story in the name. It's a notebook from Story Supply. Story Supply is a company based out of the York, Pennsylvania area, and they manufacture this notebook in the US as well. They launched their first product back in 2015 via a Kickstarter campaign, and they've been growing ever since. And today I'm going to be taking a look at their pocket staple notebook. When it comes to notebooks of this size, there's a number of options on the market. It's not a size that I use that often, but I want to, if that makes sense. I've been looking for reasons to use smaller notebooks like this more and more. So doing a few reviews on some stationery items is forcing me to find more ways of utilizing them, which is a good thing. It's expanding my stationery horizons. In regard to Story Supply, they have a product and they have a purpose. Here's what happens when you order one of these Story Supply notebooks or a notebook pack. They create something called supply kits. These supply kits include things like notebooks and writing tools or other items which Story Supply on their site states directly support the creative learning endeavors of students. The more items that Story Supply sells, the more supply kits are created. And then those kits are distributed to the programs that they partner with and put in the hands of kids that could use a little bit of help. Story Supply has partnered with organizations around the country who provide things like free tutoring and writing and art instruction to kids in underserved communities. For example, they work a great deal with 826 Valencia out of San Francisco and their other satellite 826 sites around the country. This shirt right here is one that I picked up when visiting the Pirate store at 826 in Valencia in San Francisco. The organization got their name because their address is 826 Valencia in the Mission District. The shirt actually says 826 with a piratey theme. A couple of years ago, I was visiting a natural history museum in my area, and I happened to be wearing this shirt, and I was walking around with the family, and a docent just stopped me and asked me why I was wearing this shirt that said "Death to Whales." I had to explain that no, it was numbers. I was not wishing death to all whales. The Pirate Store in San Francisco is a very cool place that I recommend that you visit if you're ever in the area. Their organization has grown now, so there's several satellite stores around the country, and some of them have their own themes like superheroes or robots and things like that. I met Vito, one of the co-founders of Story Supply, at the DC show a couple of months back, and he was nice enough to provide me with a 3-pack of these notebooks for review. And so let's take a look at a notebook. And in order to do so, why don't you join me over here at camera 2. This is how the 3-pack arrives. It has a sleeve here that says strong enough to hold big ideas, but small enough to fit in your pocket. The Story Supply notebook is 3.5 by 5.5. It comes with a rather thick number 100 craft tone paper cover from the French paper company. On the front, it says Story Supply, and on the inside cover is an area for some info, which is just nicer than leaving it totally blank. This is a 48-page notebook, which means that it contains 12 pieces of paper that are staple bound, and then they are folded over, so the 12 actually becomes 48. The paper is from a company called Cougar Natural and is their number 70 paper. I find the paper to be pretty smooth. It's not toothy or rough at all. This is their lined paper, but they're also available in graph as well as blank. I personally like the lined paper, but I'm not a doodler, so I'm not drawing pictures or things like that. I can barely write a straight line, or even draw on a straight line, even when I have lines to guide me. So blank or graph really doesn't work for me. But that's just a personal preference. There's a lot of folks out there that hate lined and really only want graph or blank. I thought I would test things out here with a number of pens and a variety of ink. To begin with, we have some ink that got a lot of buzz when it came out earlier this year, and that is Organics Studio Walden Pond. This is an interesting green-blue that's more green than blue. I used a glass pen for the text, and then I swabbed the ink here with a Q-tip a little lighter on this side of the page and rather thick on this side of the page. Now, this is one of the Marmon word cards that I use for my ink swatches, and you can see on this paper that the Walden Pond sheens like crazy. It's like all sheen. But on the story supply paper, there is really no sheen at all. Different papers are going to react to sheening inks differently. In regard to bleed through, on the lighter side, there's virtually none. There's just a trace here at the beginning, but that's pretty impressive. And on the heavier swab, there's a substantial amount of bleed at the top, but keep in mind, I applied a large amount of ink to that page, so some bleed through was to be expected. Overall, I think it performs very well in that regard. Okay, so let's see how it performs with a variety of pens. First of all, here is a tactile turn stainless steel shaker ballpoint. Tactile Turn is currently running a Kickstarter campaign for these pens, as well as another model called the Mover. So get it? The Mover and the Shaker? Well, you just might be seeing the Mover and Shaker here in an upcoming video. So we have the Tactile Turn. And this is the shaker. And the refill on this is actually a Schmidt, we'll call it Easy Flow, so that's EF, just for easy flow, not extra fine, 9000. Okay, now in regard to an extra fine nib, we have the Wing Sung 698, which is an interesting pen, which really borrows heavily from a TWSBI Diamond 580, but it's one of the only pens in my collection that actually has an extra fine nib. So we have here the Wing Sung .698, and this is an extra fine. And the ink is Monteverde Blue. After that, we have a fine nib, and we have a Lamy All-Star. And this happens to be the very first fountain pen I ever purchased. So we have the Lamy All-Star. And the ink here is, and this is a fine nib, and the ink we have here is Mont Blanc, Lucky Orange. Which is one of my favorite oranges right now. For a medium nib, we have a Tacchia Spectrum. This is a pen I purchased, and I really haven't spent a lot of time with it yet. It has a very cool two-toned steel nib, and you know, I need to use this a bit more to figure out how I feel about it, but my initial reactions were positive. So we have the Tacchia, and this is the Spectrum. And this has a medium steel nib, and the ink is Robert Oster, and it's Bondi Blue. Now, the Tacchia has more of a Japanese medium, but let's take a look at something that has more of a Western medium. So here we have a Visconti Millionaire. This pen is unique because the cap and the barrel are both made from marble. This is a very interesting pen. If you haven't seen it already, I have a review of this on my channel. There's a lot of cool things going on with this pen, but the nib is a very generous medium. So we have a Visconti Millionaire. And this is Mont Blanc. And this is Irish Green. Then we have a Pilot Custom Heritage 912, which has a music nib. If you haven't seen it, you might want to check out my music nib video that I did in conjunction with Mike from Ink Dependence. It was a lot of fun to put together. So here we have a Pilot Custom Heritage 912, and this is a music nib, and the ink is Lamy Petrol. And this was a music, we'll say MS for music nib. Okay, then finally we have a 2.4 millimeter Pilot Parallel, which doesn't have a traditional finished nib, but more of two thin, wide, flat plates of metal that the ink flows between. So here, we'll just do this on the side here. So here we have the Pilot Parallel. And this is a 2.4 millimeter. And the ink here is Ackerman. Shocking Blue. Now, between the two of these, you'll see a little bit of bleed through over here, but that's to be expected. With some of these pens, especially like the Parallel here, I was laying down quite a lot of ink. So it's not a knock against the paper. You lay down enough ink on just about any paper, it's going to bleed through. So when it comes to notebooks like this, I feel the judge of the paper is if it is fountain pen friendly, not necessarily if it holds up to abuse. And I feel that this paper is definitely fountain pen friendly. And then, one more thing. I showed you the ink swab for the Walden Pond ink. Well, here is what the ink swab for the Walden Pond ink looks like after a puppy gets a hold of it. And then here is the puppy's paw. And then here is the puppy's face. To show some feathering comparisons, I took some microscope pictures. These are all done with the same pen and the same ink, Iroshizuku Konpeki. And I tried to apply the same amount of pressure during each of the samples. Here's the story supply paper, and the dots there are what the horizontal lines are on the paper. It's what they look like up close. And then here's some paper from a Moleskine notebook that I purchased a couple of years ago before I knew any better. And you can see that there's a heavier amount of feathering here. And then here's some Rhodia 80-gram paper, which surprised me that it had a bit more feathering than the Story Supply notebook. And then finally, here's some Tomoe River paper. You can see how crisp and clean that line is with virtually no feathering or bleeding at all. I mean, wow, that's just a stark contrast. It really shows exactly why folks rave about Tomoe River paper. But in regard to these comparisons, the Story Supply notebook I felt was between the Tomoe River and the Rhodia, which surprised me a bit. I thought that the Rhodia would have performed a little bit better. It's my daily workhorse paper that I use every single day. I find this 3.5 by 5.5 size to be very convenient. It fits really nice in a front or back pocket. Lately I've been carrying it around in my Pen Addict penvelope, which has a nice little pouch that it fits in, and then there's a little pouch in there for a pen or two. So a 3-pack of these pocket staple notebooks sell for $10. So that's $3.33 for each one, which I think is a reasonable price for these. I'll put a link below to the Story Supply site where you can check these out. They also launched recently a notebook called the 407, which is named in honor of the 407 backers they had on their original Kickstarter project for these notebooks. As I mentioned, Vito from Story Supply was nice enough to provide me with a 3-pack of these notebooks. I used one for this review, but the other 2 I'm going to go ahead and give away. I'm not going to necessarily have a contest per se. A while ago, I've asked viewers for correspondence to my P.O. box, which you can find in the notes below. And a lot of folks have written, and I appreciate that. If you write me or send me some art or a magnet for my wall up here, I have a number of things like these notebooks or stickers or pen cases or any other number of other random items which I've been accumulating over time. If you include a return address, I promise that I will write back, and you might just see a little something extra in there as well. In my opinion, the Story Supply notebook is a very good product, and it supports a good cause. And while the ultimate goal of a business is to sell a product and make money, it's nice to see a company have some additional goals outside of sheer profit. In the future here, I'm actually looking to have an increased variety of reviews, so my channel will still be fountain pen dominant, but you might just see more things like notebooks or peripherals or inks show up every once in a while, or at least more often than you have in the past. So, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.